চোখের আলোয় দেখেছিলে চোখের বাহিরে অন্তরে আজ দেখব যখন আলোক নাহিলে
I think one of the best ways to describe Rabindranath is he's perhaps one of the best examples of the Renaissance in India that happened in the turn of the 19th century when India was trying to break away from the British colonialists. If you were to just look at the multifaceted personality of Rabindranath, he was a very gifted musician. He was a very gifted poet, of course, but he was a playwright, and he was also, I'm told, quite gifted even in a little bit of commerce, because the family, even though they were all involved in some arts, basically they were landlords. And it was very difficult to be a landlord and not have a little bit of business acumen too. So a very crucial part of Rabindranath's life was spent managing a portion of the estate of their family. Now, this is perhaps something that not a lot of people would like to admit, because in those days the landlords were very cruel, and the only way they could survive was by oppressing all those who worked under them. But this is a very interesting aspect in Rabindranath's life, that this was, I think, when he was in his late teens and early 20s, that he was looking after a portion of what they owned in what is today Bangladesh. But what's interesting is that period of his life when he was in Bangladesh, he also came in direct contact with peasants, boatmen, and people who lived a very simple life. And it seems that he learned enormously from direct interaction with simple folk, their music, because he has a lot of songs that are directly inspired by the boatman's songs. Songs that boatmen generally wrote were very sad and melancholic songs, because the life of a boatman is a very lonely life. He has to leave his family and ferry people from one end of the river bank to the other, sometimes not even being able to spend time with his family. So things like that influenced Rabindranath enormously too in his future, if you like, the future effulgence of the development of his poetic and artistic facets.
I had the fortune of studying in Shantiniketan for 5 years, from 92 to 97, and very frankly, it is during this time that I really discovered Rabindranath Tagore. I had always heard about him, but it is after studying there that I really experienced his true contribution as an educationalist, as an artist, as a creative writer, as an aesthete, as a nationalist leader. He had so many multifaceted personalities to his persona. He was very, very futuristic, very broad-minded, very open in his understanding about art, about education, about politics. Initially, he was part of the freedom nationalist movement, but when he realized that it was getting into more of an activism, he slowly retired from this and entered into the educational field, which he felt was actually the true way to shape a country. And Tagore, as all of you know, was the son of Rabindranath Tagore. In 1860s, when he's traveling across Birbhum one afternoon, comes across a field, a barren field with a few trees, where the eye can reach the horizon on all sides, And he finds this place very peaceful, he finds this place very silent, and very soon he acquires this land and he calls it Shantiniketan. It is here in the next 40 years that he builds humble residential place, a Brahmo Samaj prayer hall, and then it is in 1901 that Rabindranath Tagore comes here and starts a humble school. This is a painting of Kalabhavan, the campus in Kalabhavan where I studied. It is one of my early landscapes, which I'm very fond of because it gives me back the memories of this beautiful tapovan, this beautiful educational institution which is amongst trees, amongst the forest. So what Tagore wanted to do at Shantiniketan was, he wanted students to be close to nature. He wanted education and nature to be connected, art and education to be connected. He felt that art was also very, very seminal to education. It is not just like an added faculty, but it is at the very center of education. And that is what this his experiment at Shantiniketan had.
At an early age, Rabindranath's father had sent him to Shilaidaho in Bangladesh. To look after the ancestral Jamindari, which was located in different parts of North and East Bengal. Rabindranath had no knowledge of the management of Jamindari estates, but he accepted the challenge and he proved to be successful and a benevolent Jamindar. His sojourn in Shilaidaho unfolded to him the ever-changing beauty of nature, and this blossomed his poetic imagination. This brought him in contact with the ryots and villagers, and provided him an opportunity to study their problems. He centered his activities in the village of Surul and founded in that village a center known as Sriniketan, that is the abode of prosperity. Both Sriniketan and Shantiniketan were surrounded by villages. Sriniketan was an agricultural center, and he undertook several rural projects, while Shantiniketan was an intellectual and cultural hub. But these villages were malaria infested, and the scourge of malaria had completely sapped their vitality. Rabindranath launched the Surul and Sriniketan program very seriously. Subsequently, many cooperative health centers were started in different villages. For the education of the villagers, village boys, he set up a new school in Sriniketan known as Shiksha Shatra. Here the tribal boys and the poor boys of the villagers were taught. The curriculum of this school were formulated keeping in mind rural needs and requirements. Subsequently, a rural college, rural agricultural college was set up. Rabindranath exhorted the villagers to adopt scientific method of cultivation and use modern agricultural implements. In the foundation of Sriniketan, Rabindranath wanted to protect and revive the decayed arts and crafts of Bengal, like weaving, carpet making, paper making, leather works, carpentry, batik, so on and so forth. Within a short time, Sriniketan began to hum with productive activities.
আকাশ ভরা সূর্য তারা বিশ্ব ভরা প্রাণ তাহারি মাঝখানে আমি পেয়েছি মোর স্থান বিস্ময়ে
2,200 songs. That is almost unbelievable.
Unbelievable, yes, yes, yes. And most of the songs were also put to tune by himself. He was the one who would sing and teach music directors how to go about it. They could subsequently, of course, slightly, adjust them to this or that, but then the basic raga and the basic tune of any song which he wrote was given by himself. And he did not agree that somebody's song can be put to tune by somebody else, because he believed that the tune and the word, they are born out of the same kind of inspiration. So they must go together.
Tagore, his oeuvre, as you call it, is huge, absolutely huge. And you can take any branch of literature which comprises of a whole lot of things. You will find that he has written something on it. And there are novels, there are short stories, huge collection of short stories, novels, plays, travelogues, essays on philosophy, essays on society, condition of society at that time, and then letters, all kinds of things. Actually, the original publication of his, not the original, quite an old one, was 26 volumes. Later on, they have, of course, reduced the number with thinner pages, etc. all that. And about poetry, only poetry, there are several volumes of his poetry. More or less, they have been published under different names, collections of poems under different names like Shonatori, Bolaka, Shamoli, Malini, sorry?
Gitanjali.
Gitanjali, yes, Gitanjali. And these can be more or less, arranged according to the development of his genius, particularly the poetry part. And then, as you said, the songs. This I'm keeping away from poetry. That, as you said, 2000 something. I initially heard there were 3,000. I don't know exactly the number. And so he was a prolific writer, and his oeuvre is huge. And he has commented and written on every possible subject. At that time when he was writing, the struggle for freedom was of a very, very important subject then. He has written a lot. He has written a lot of songs on that. He has written a lot of essays on that. Apart from that, the Bengal society, or more or less the Indian society also, was very different to what it is today. I would focus on one little thing, not quite little, but it's one of his very famous poem, a long poem written on Sri Aurobindo. And you see, I'm a lover of Tagore. I love him. But to my judgment, that's one of his best writings. And the way he sees Sri Aurobindo in the freedom struggle at that time. Sri Aurobindo left Calcutta in 1910. Before that. So it's very early 20th century, you can say. It was very precisely written after he had been put in the cell, prison. Actually, he came out after a year. Sri Aurobindo was released, and I believe Tagore wrote it then. And it's a beautiful, beautiful poem, very beautiful poem. And in that poem, you can see his reaction to the social condition of India at that time. As you were asking me how it is different. First of all, a nation being under in subjugation and a nation free, there makes a whole world of difference. Every daily life was difficult for people. Basically, what actually was lacking in those days, and what Sri Aurobindo really made people aware of, the indignity of being a subject nation. It was an insult, and that insult had to be felt, and people didn't feel it.
Aruta, what
Yes.
is the situation now today with the Rabindranath songs and the poems? Are they still à la vogue?
Yes, very much, very much. Although certain people, they are trying to change little bit this way, that way. This should not have been there. There must be some mistake by the person who wrote the notations, all those things. And there are some other people, they completely change it. Like, why it should remain like those 100 years old, 150 years old Rabindranath Tagore, they should be modernized, and they sing all sorts of things, but these are all, time will not accept it. যদি তারে নাই চিনিব সেদিন, যদি তারে নাই চিনিব সেদিন, সে কি আমায় নেবে চিনে, সে কি আমায় নেবে চিনে, এই নব ফাল্গুনের দিনে, জানিনে জানিনে, যদি তারে নাই চিনিব সে কি।
What is really interesting, it is now a very important anniversary in the life of Tagore. It is in 1913 that he received the Nobel Prize.
The first, not only Indian, but also Asian Nobel Prize.
Yes, that is very important for him because he was recognized, acknowledged as a great man, but usually people all around recognize only when a title is conferred. When the prestigious title of Nobel Prize was conferred, then he was recognized very much in Calcutta, in Bengal. Curiously enough, few years previously, in Calcutta public examination, they gave to the students a passage of Tagore, asking them to put it in correct Bengali. And the same Calcutta University, when the Nobel Prize was awarded on the same year, that is to say 100 years ago, they have conferred him the title of Doctor Honoris Causa.
It's also true that, and I somewhere agree with you, that he's a modern Rishi. The way I would describe a modern Rishi is somebody who is trying to link himself to his inner self, to a higher atmosphere, what we can generally call God, while not rejecting life and society, being very much part of life, being very much part of all the problems, sufferings, happinesses of common life, having to deal with them, while being very focused on the higher aspirations of man, if I may say. Not just, wanting to live a better life, having a bigger house, having a happy family, which, unfortunately he didn't have. He didn't have a very happy family life. His wife died very young, both his children died very young, and he actually outlived them both. So, this is perhaps one of the saddest things. But yet, this said, all this to tell you that yes, I do agree that he can be very correctly termed as a modern Rishi. If you read most of his poems that come in his book called Gitanjali, which was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1913, while the poems can be termed in a certain way as poems of love, but in fact it's very, very easy to see that they are actually love for the divine, love for God, and the incredible depth in these poems speak of somebody who really lived in a different world. That's, to me, as a very simple bystander. I don't have to be myself a Tagore to say that. This is perhaps shared with at least the last few generations that have lived in Bengal, and I have felt also in whatever I have traveled today, all over the world. It's amazing how some of Tagore's poems, some of Tagore's words, Rabindranath's words, are meaningful to people who have nothing to do with India. Just to give you an example, just the other day, there was the Consul General of France for Pondicherry, who started his farewell speech, because he's going to now leave his posting in Pondicherry, started his speech with one of Tagore's really beautiful quotes, where he said, I'm quoting by memory, it's not the right words perhaps, that to him the birth of every child was the assurance that God still had hope for humanity. So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thought, and so relevant even today for us, when every day when you read the newspaper or you hear the television news, you really have to struggle to find something positive being told about what's happening in the world. Unfortunately, the things that jump out at us in all our lives today is how many people have been killed in a war somewhere, how many people are being put in jail because they are protesting for something, how many people have unfortunately had some calamity or the other. and you really wonder where the world is going. Yet, even I agree that the very fact that God chooses for humanity to go on is a real sign that I think there is still hope.
How was the atmosphere at the time when he received the Nobel Prize, and how was it received by the Indian people? Did they know it? How was the atmosphere, the general atmosphere?
You see, in 1913, India was, of course, right in the middle of the stage where they really wanted the British to go. It was the time when Sri Aurobindo had started the whole movement of what he called Swaraj, or self-rule. Sri Aurobindo was the first person to say that no, the British have to go. No compromises, no this and that, maybe some discussions, but the British have to go. And it was the time when the Indian National Congress was in its infancy, but was very strongly coming out with the movement of the British have to go. So there was a strong movement for rejecting the West somewhere, while at the same time the educated Indian group were very clear about what the Nobel Prize was, because it was undoubtedly being accepted as the most important international recognition of you being the most important poet or literature of your time. So certainly it was accepted by many in India during that time, especially amongst the educated, that it was a very important award. That's one side, no doubt. The other side is, there's a very nice poem that Rabindranath wrote himself when he got the Nobel Prize, which is also set to music like a lot of his poems. A rough translation from the Bengali is that this necklace, because the Nobel Prize was like a necklace, it was like a medal that you wore. So this necklace medal around my neck doesn't befit me. It goes like this: Ei monihar amar nahi saje. This monihar, which means this necklace with jewels of mine, doesn't suit me. He says then that if I want to remove it, it hurts, and if I want to wear it, it weighs on me. So I don't know what really it means. So it's a very interesting reflection, because it's clear that while he must have surely been very happy, but he was also perhaps not very comfortable that he got that he got this recognition. But very interestingly, what I had read is that the first thought that occurred to him when the reality sank in that he had indeed got the Nobel Prize was that, oh, finally the money that comes with the award will help me to build my school in Shantiniketan. So I think most of what he got as the award money went into the building and the expansion of Shantiniketan. It's a very interesting reflection, because I'm sure there are not all the Nobel Prize winners who will want to say that, more than the recognition, the money plays an important role too. But I think Rabindranath was quite clear that I'm glad I got the money, now I'll be able to use it for the school. I wonder how many people of his generation had the chance or the possibility of traveling as much as he did. because in 1913 it wasn't easy in the turn of the century to travel as much as he did. He was in Russia, he was in China, he was in all over Europe, he was in South America. Perhaps he didn't go to Australia, but this apart, he was all over Japan. Amazing how much he traveled, and how much, I'll also say, how much he was well received also. It's not that he went as a celebrity. I mean, in those days, you know, it's not like today's world where everybody knows who is where. So
At that time, it was also the time when Vivekananda was opening to the world, and the world was opening to Indian spirituality.
Yes.
They were hungry for something else.
I would like to make a little difference. I think the message that Vivekananda gave, the Swami Vivekananda gave of the Indian spirituality was a very dynamic, very vibrant, and a very strong sense of what we call our dharma, or I can't call dharma our religion, I'll call it the way of our life. And Vivekananda's message was very clearly linked to our Vedas and our Upanishads.
The Advaita.
Exactly. Very clear, very direct, very authentic, and also very dynamic. I feel Rabindranath's message was a little more, if you like, universal. In the sense, it wasn't just linked to Hinduism, not linked just to the Vedas and to the Upanishads, but if you like, a little more global. I'm not trying to say Swami Vivekananda's message was better or whatever. I'm just trying to make a distinction. This also could have in its origin and its roots the fact that Rabindranath was brought up in a family and in an environment which was part of the Brahmo Samaj. If you know, the Brahmo Samaj was this movement in the turn of century India when people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Rabindranath's father Devendranath Tagore were trying to establish, to break the shackles of the very oppressive Hindu religion that was being practiced by the Brahmins of the time, when there were very, very oppressive practices that were being enforced on the people, like widows could not remarry, sometimes wives were forced to follow their husbands,
burn themselves
in the pyre, and there was this strong movement amongst the educated Indians to stop this and to break away from it. And from that came the Brahmo Samaj, which was a very interesting blend, mix of the Reformed Church movement, the best of the Hindu movement, the best of the Church, the best of Buddhism, and bring something that was acceptable to all, even from the pure intellectual level. So Rabindranath came from that background. So while I'm sure he had a relatively good Hindu background, but he also came from this school of thought, which was a little more, if you like, global, with like elements of the Catholic and the Protestant movement, as well as Buddhism. So I think both of them give a very interesting, like Swami Vivekananda and Rabindranath both give a very interesting picture of what came from India. And I feel people who come from all walks of life can read something from him and it speaks to them. It needn't be that they have to know about India, not at all. It's something that speaks to everybody because it's something very universal, if you like.
So then King George made him knight.
Yes, he received the knighthood, which he returned in 1914. You see, a little bit of Indian history. Around 1910, 1915, during this period, especially in the area of Punjab, in the region of Punjab, there was a very strong movement to really reject the British, and this resulted in perhaps one of the most ghastly incidents that happened in the Indian freedom movement, where in a peaceful gathering in Punjab, in Amritsar, the British police in charge, I'm not sure, he was of course General Dyers, but I'm not really sure what was his exact designation, but he was maybe the police in charge of that area, ordered his troops to fire on helpless, peaceful Indians who had gathered for a holy congregation, if you like. This was known as the Jallianwala Bagh massacre because the garden where they had gathered was called Jallianwala Bagh, and perhaps it is the most ghastly, one of the most brutal acts that have been recorded in recent history, where I don't have the real numbers, but it's just incredible how many people were shot in cold blood in the clear orders given by the British general. Now, what was also extremely sad was that even though this was immediately reported in the British press, nobody worth their salt ever came out with a clear apology or with a clear message of regret. In fact, it was treated as something which was perfectly normal for doing to keep the so-called colonial power intact, and this was a necessary act to control those who were under the British crown. Now, as a result of this, Rabindranath wrote a letter, a very strong letter, to clearly say that while I respect the fact that you have given me this honor of being a knight in your empire, unfortunately I cannot even think of continuing to bear that honor, because as far as you are concerned, you who are supposed to be our king, do not even have a basic feeling for its people, that you don't even do anything about this. So I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry to want to give you back whatever honor you gave. Now, I'm not sure if too many other eminent Indians of that time had the courage to come forward to return whatever honors the British had given them at that time. For example, there were many so-called kings, many so-called people in power who bore certain privileges that the British government had given them, who had the courage to return it back, saying that sorry, this is not what we want from you, because there was always some vested interest involved. When the British gave you something, it was always to take back something else or to get something from you. I'm not sure if there were too many other Indians who had the courage or the, let's say, the moral instinct to return back the privileges that the British had conferred upon them. So in that way, I feel Rabindranath was perhaps one of the few who came forward very strongly. His letter is quite a powerful letter, where it is polite while being very firm as to why he was doing it, because in those days it was unthinkable that you would return back something that your king gave you. but he had the courage to do it.
What do you like? What attracts you in Rabindranath's songs? Why him and
not anybody else? You see, there is a little thing that while I was thinking about this interview, I was jotting down actually. Sri Aurobindo says about Rabindranath, he is the wayfarer to the same goal as ours. I have this impression in my mind that when a great personality or a great avatar or a great power takes a human form on earth, there are people who prepare the path. As you call the outriders, you have a VIP passing and you have the outriders like kings used to have in those days. I feel Rabindranath had that element in him. And that's why what he has written in some of them, some of his writings, some of his poems particularly, and sonnets, where he very clearly declares that বৈরাগ্য সাধনে মুক্তি সে আমার নয়. A liberation found through renunciation is not my path. He totally refused to accept that in order to know the Brahman or know the Supreme, know the Divine, you have to discard this life, material life. He didn't believe in that. And that particular sonnet goes on to say, it's very beautiful, he says that I will find you in all my relations, in the love that I feel in my relations, the pain that I feel in through my relations or my life, and that love will turn into bhakti. He doesn't use the word transformation, which is rupantar in Bengali. In Sanskrit also it's rupantar. He doesn't use, he just says it will turn into something else. So he sees things in a changed form in future to come, somewhere in future. He had loved nature very dearly. He had loved life very dearly. And not loved life in the sense he loved human being and the relation with them, the nature around him. He's a superb poet of nature. So this connection that he establishes beyond the apparent is something I don't find it in anybody else. That's one reason why I feel attracted. There's the other reason is that he's a lover of beauty. Yet again, I will quote and translate from Nulinida, where he says about beauty and Rabindranath, where he says that তার অন্তঃপুরুষটি সৌন্দর্য হইতে সৌন্দর্যের মধ্যে দিয়া সৌন্দর্যের দিকে যাত্রা. What he means to say, the inner being of Rabindranath, its journey through life was a journey from beauty, through beauty, towards beauty. So beauty occupied a very big place in Rabindranath's creation. Disharmony, ugliness, harsh.
Especially at that time of history.
Yeah, exactly. To be able to see it even then. You see, it's amazing the way he says it. So let me finish this issue. So what you have this concept of Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram in the attributes of the Brahman Supreme. So I feel that he had chosen that Sundaram part and worshipped the Supreme through it. So this touch of beauty, it's just spread right across his writing. And then the devotion that he had for his divine, for God, for Supreme, for the Brahman, Ishvara, whatever he called. The presence. It was a presence in his case. And the way he expresses it the best in his songs. You see the aspiration so beautifully expressed. And you know what's most interesting is that if you read his poems, you are in a state of mind vis-a-vis, let's say, your devotion, your inner life. A particular state, you will find a poem that expresses it, a song that expresses it, not so much poem, a song that expresses it. So all the varied colors that a man has when he wants to love the divine, when he wants to surrender to the divine, when he wants to orient his life towards the divine, and so often fails. That pain is so beautifully expressed in his songs. And even when he has received something, that joyous mood of expressing it, that I have got it, you have touched me. So he's very, this spiritual part, the devotional part, he was a bhakta actually. And he understood the heart and mind and the aspiration of a bhakta very well. And he provides us with that. And I'll quote one or two songs. And it's a peculiar relation that he has with his divine. I'll quote one or two. He says that তাই তোমার আনন্দ আমার পর. You take joy out of me because, and that is why you have come down. You have come to me. Why? আমায় নইলে ত্রিভুবনেশ্বর তোমার প্রেম হতো যে মিছে. He said, without me, whom would you love? Your love would go waste. So you had to come down. You had to create me and create this Leela of yours between you and me. Because of me, you have created all this. Because you needed me. So this concept that the bhakta needs Bhagavan, the divine, and the divine also needs the bhakta. Then somewhere else, he talks about being grateful for what he has received. He says that amare tumi অশেষ করেছ এমনই লীলা তব. Your Leela is such that you have made me infinite. On how many hills and how many dales and across how many rivers and the border of how many streams have you not carried me in your hand, me, this tiny little flute of yours? How many melodies have you not played on me? To whom shall I say all this? Such is your Leela, that you have made me infinite. Your eyes, your gaze fills the sky, and you are constantly looking at me. Why? The day I open my eyes, of course he's not talking about the physical eye, The day I open my inner eyes and gaze back at you in your light, your looking and gazing at me will be fulfilled, because you are waiting for me to wake up and look at you. Then he says, this is typical Tagore, because you see, it's very hardly anywhere that you find that he doesn't bring in nature in some or other way. You're so fond of nature, so fond of nature. The blossoming of flowers would be wasted. The spring flowers of Fagun, that's the name of the month, will be wasted if this one little bud of mine doesn't blossom. And you are waiting for blossoming of my bud. And then he goes on to say, these lines are very beautiful, and I'll translate it. Image-wise, poetically, it's very beautiful. He said, every wave that hits it, every wave, the bank tries to hold to itself. I'm like that. Those that come and hit me, and each one I want to make my own, they hit and they go away. Where do they go? You have hundreds and thousands of suns in you. You never lose anything. Nothing is lost in you. Won't this little wealth of mine, will it not find a place at your feet? Because once it goes to you, nothing is lost. So you have different colors, where he approaches the divine and the way he expresses his love, his devotion. This is what really attracts me. Sometimes I feel, aDNAn, poetry is untranslatable.
Rabindranath was out and out a patriot. National interest dominated his thoughts. He had seen the birth of the Indian National Congress and sung songs in the pulpit of the Indian National Congress in 1896. To Rabindranath goes the credit of composing the national anthems of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and India.
You see, there are songs that are known as Baulangik. The tunes are like Baul, you see, and the thought is of that nature. One which is very pretty common is who will come and break open my prison door and take me out? So you say, oh my friend, who's going to break open this prison house where I am been sitting and waiting? Who will do it? In Bengali literature, there is a tradition. This is again about, I don't know, 400 years old. The Vaishnava Dharma was very strong in Bengal, and a lot of poets came out writing about the love between Radha and Krishna. So that body of songs, they were known as kirtanas. They had a very typical music set to, they were sung and they were set to very typical style of music, of melody. And they were known as Vaishnava Padavali. And there are about 3-4, Sri Aurobindo has translated a few of them. Very beautifully actually. Rabindranath took that style of poetry and wrote a few in that Vaishnava Padavali style. And the style was, you know what, it's pretty common, used to be common in India, where you mention your name, the poet mentions his name at the end of in the last line. You find the same thing with Urdu Shairi also, they mention their own name.
Shairi is the word for poets?
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
Shairi is the word for poets?
Poetry.
Poetry, Shairi.
Urdu Shairi.
Ah.
That is Urdu Shairi. The style of ghazals that are written in Urdu are known as Shairi, and Shair is the poet.
So it's the same word in Turkish as well?
Ah, really?
And also ghazals.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Achha. Yes, it's Arabic. I think it comes from the same root. So they also have this tradition of mentioning their names at the end of the poem. And this Vaishnava Padavali, people also mention their own names at the end of the poem. Rabindranath does the same thing when he writes in that style, and he calls himself Bhanu Singh. Bhanu is sun, Ravindra again is the sun, and he just takes another word for Surya and calls him Bhanu Singha Padavali, Bhanu Singha.
बाउल बाजाए 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 रे एक तारा बाउल बाजाए रे शराबेला धरे झरो 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 धारा बाउल बाजाए रे.
This is a song which has a heading of being love. My lamp has been blown out by the wind of the night. You just you look at the image he creates, the picture he creates. My lamp is blown out by the night wind. You come very softly. You come very softly, but because there is no light, please don't go away, because my lamp is not lighted. Then he says, if you pass by my house this way, if you pass this way, you will recognize my house by the fragrance of the tuberose which blossoms at night. That is my house, where the tube, you will get the fragrance of the tuberose. So don't go away. I am waiting for you. I'm waiting when you would finally remember me. Amare poribe mone kokhon she lagi prohore prohore ami gan geye jagi. Look at these beautiful lines. He said, when I'm waiting that sometime you will remember me. And for that I keep myself awake by singing and singing and singing. I'm waiting for you. And then this is very beautiful. He said, but I'm afraid that towards the end of the night, if I fall asleep and you come and you go away. You see the delicacy of the whole thing. He's so delicate, he's so subtle.
Such a beautiful soul.
So that's what you touch, when you read Rabindranath's, and this is under, it's headed, the heading is love here. I can't imagine that this being written for a woman or for a man. It is the soul that is waiting. There is another point, aDNAn, the point is that there is another thing which is, I feel, is pretty unique in Rabindranath. That this is again, Norlinda says that his inner being came from another loka, another world altogether. And he wanted, or he saw this ordinary thing, ordinary life, the mundane things, through a different angle. So when he talks about very human love, human relation, he sort of puts it up, He gives it a different dimension altogether. And that I find is unique in Rabindranath. He's talking about ordinary human love. You have his novels, you have his short stories where he talks about human love. Without that, the corroding element, you see. You see, there are, it's like an acid, which in origin, however good, however beautiful we in our consciousness can be, I'm just talking about that, talking about anything divine or something beyond. I'm talking about us. And whatever is there in us which can be really beautiful, but to a certain extent, we have been given the capacity of producing things that are beautiful. Feeling beautifully, looking at things from a beautiful angle, we have been given that capacity. Man is not without it. But there is this acid element, which corrodes. A very beautiful relation can be in a moment totally destroyed by something that is, which we will call misunderstanding or this or that, but it is that acid, one drop of acid that can spoil. So he sees relations, life, situations without that corroding element. He puts it up. He doesn't allow it to come down. If you read his novels, there is a very famous novel by Rabindranath which is, it's called Maluncho. Maluncho is a garden, is a word for garden. So there, it's a very common thing, it's a triangle, but it is woven round a garden. And this man was a businessman who used to supply flowers to the main Calcutta market. And he has a big garden and this and that and a whole lot of things. And his wife, him and his wife together used to look after that garden. And their specialty were orchids and all that. Then she falls ill. She gets bedridden. And a cousin of hers is brought in to help this man. And there is another brother also there. So there are four characters at the most. And then it's the same, very, very common thing. The wife feels jealous about this young girl who is helping her husband, and there is a little bit of something between the two. But the way he puts it the whole thing. It's so common. The reaction is, the way she feels is so common. But the way he says it, he mixes up with the garden, with the flowers, with the reaction of the characters in relation to flowers. And she lies there before her open window and looks at the garden and looks at those flowers blossoming. In the whole thing that he calls it Malancho, he calls it garden. But only Rabindranath can handle a subject like that, including the garden into human relation. The garden is a very big, very important part in that novel. It's a thin, tiny little novel, about 200 pages or so. Superb, absolutely. So only Rabindranath can do it. That's my point. That even when he's talking about very ordinary things, he has a way of saying things.
আমার হৃদয় তোমার আপন হাতের দোলে দোলাও 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 আমার হৃদয় তোমার আপন হাতের দোলে দোলাও 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 আমার হৃদয় কে আমারে কি যে বলে কে আমারে
Rabindranath made his first acquaintance of Sri Aurobindo when Sri Aurobindo was heading the freedom movement. I don't want to quote exact dates, but it's that whole period post, just before 1900 and into 1900. Especially when Sri Aurobindo was imprisoned, especially when Sri Aurobindo was writing in the Bande Mataram and very clearly being right at the forefront of taking the British colonialists head on, so to say. And Rabindranath had written a very beautiful poem that started as Aurobindo Robindrer Lao Namaskar, which means, O Aurobindo, accept the salutation of Rabindranath. And in those days, the poem was all about how much he was in admiration of Sri Aurobindo's personality and Sri Aurobindo's work that he was doing to fight the British. I have to say that when Sri Aurobindo followed his Adesh to leave the political scene and come to Pondicherry to develop his spiritual, I'm not
sadhana.
sure, yeah, exactly, to live his life of spiritual sadhana and to write and to do what he said was the most important thing, to write about his philosophy. And he came to Pondicherry following the Adesh that he received. A lot of people misunderstood it and were not very appreciative of it. I think Rabindranath was perhaps for a while in this situation. But then Rabindranath came to Pondicherry. I think he was on his way to Sri Lanka or somewhere like that. But he stopped in Pondicherry and he came to meet Sri Aurobindo and the mother too, I think. And nobody really knows what happened in their little interview. All I know is that it was a private interview, but the world knows that when he finished his little meeting and he went back, he had to take the boat from Pondicherry port. He wrote a poem immediately after in the Pondicherry port, in the ship that he took, where he starts by saying again, Aurobindo, Robindre, Law, Namaskar, the same thing. But this time he wrote about how he was completely convinced that this man was something just beyond everybody else, and how this man had actually truly found what he was looking for in his life, and how he was realizing what he absolutely strongly believed. And he ends the poem once again by saying, when I first knew you, I had written, O Aurobindo, accept the salutation of Rabindranath, and I do so again today by saying, O Aurobindo, accept the salutation of Rabindra. Where whatever it be, I think it takes a lot of humility for somebody of his stature, of his, let's say, of his recognition, to completely, without any doubt, say that this man is really somebody so great, so beyond us, so beyond our comprehension, that nobody really knows to what levels he has reached. It's an extremely moving poem. Unfortunately, I do not know it well enough to say it, but I would like to believe that that is perhaps one of the most important poems that he has written. Also, I feel perhaps, and I would like to believe that, there's this absolutely sublime diary recollection of the mother when she saw Sri Aurobindo for the first time on 29th March, I think 1910, most probably. Please don't quote my date. But when she wrote that the person we have seen yesterday is the clear proof that there is hope for humanity and all the problems of humanity will be solved. I would like to believe that Rabindranath saw and felt the same thing when he met Sri Aurobindo.
Rabindranath Tagore started painting in the last 16 years of his life, and in his early age he had made several attempts, but one is not very clear why he never took up the painting muse. But it seems in the last 16 years he churned out around 2,500 drawings and paintings. It was like a volcano that erupted. It was like there was something inside him which was pent up, which was closed up, and he had to express. His paintings, if we look at them, have a kind of, they cut across the normal trajectory that a master would follow, where first the artist learns technique, perspective, and then goes into creative painting. Rabindranath Tagore was already by then very well versed in many other creative arts, and so he was not new to the field of aesthetics. It's just that he lacked the technical skill for painting, but that did not deter him. It was initially his writings, his manuscripts, his erasures when something was not okay, which he would in a very playful manner turn into maybe just a decorative pot or a face, or maybe into just a pattern. And it is slowly these footnotes, which were erasures to his manuscripts, which took kind of a more planned and a bigger size of work. And if we see, there are 2 or 3 themes that he mainly deals with. One is landscapes, where generally the lighting is always like the evening twilight. It's like the evening sunset light. And there could be 2 reasons for this. One is he also took up painting in the twilight of his life. The other reason is this kind of semi-darkness gives a little more mysterious atmosphere to a work. And if we look at Tagore's paintings, they were absolutely silent paintings. They were like, one would think like for a writer like him, of his caliber, who had volumes of writings to his name, one would think like maybe like William Blake, he would be maybe illustrating his writings. But no, that is not what he did. His paintings maybe expressed something which he could not express through his writings. They almost spoke in silent words. He would either have a single figure or he would have two figures standing facing each other in very simplistic compositions, maybe not even connected to each other in their solitude, but in the evening light. Or he would have some pots which sometimes are reminiscent of Chinese pottery. They are sometimes reminiscent of very archaic forms, or they remind us of Art Nouveau. There is some reminiscence of also some German expressionism in his way of working. So we can see that Tagore, in spite of being a nationalist, in spite of being someone who did not know technique, he cut across all these boundaries and created a more modern and universal style, which was very, very different from the so-called Bengal school style which existed at that time, which his very well-known and prolific nephew Rabindranath Tagore was painting. Of course, there was Nandalal Bose, also there was Jamini Roy, but his paintings cut across any kind of schooling. And I think it is after his first show in 1930 that he had in Paris, where he really got very good appreciation for his work, that everyone turned to look at his paintings also, and he also in a way gained more confidence. And after that, if we observe his landscapes and his strokes took on a more fluidity and a more kind of painterly turn, where he started using colored inks, he started using dyes, a little bit of tint came into his works. Tagore is someone who contributed a lot to art education, as we all know. Not only that, he was a writer and a painter, and in his experiment at Shantiniketan, what he really wanted to do was, he was not interested as the normal school in just having an art modernist educational institution. He was very much interested in connecting art to daily life, in contributing to the community through art. In 1890, when his father asked him to come back to Shilaida to take care of the ancestral property, Tagore was forced to come back there and take care of the daily dealings with the workers, with the villagers around. And in fact, this experience at Shilaida, one can say, had a great impact on his literary works, had a great impact on himself as a person and on his whole life. And when he returned to Shantiniketan in 1900, he tried to bring the classroom to the nature instead of making a classroom inspired by his experience at Shilaida. He tried to connect the students to the village around, because he felt it was very important that these simple things that are there to learn from the villagers should be part of the educational system. Also, another turning point in his artistic career, one can say, would be his visit in 1917 to Japan. After visiting Japan, in fact, Tagore was so impressed, and from Japan he writes to Rabindranath Tagore, he writes to Samanendranath Tagore, saying that all of you must come and look at Japan. You must see that how Japanese art and Japanese life are beautifully and harmoniously connected. And he said, we in India, we are just closed up in our rooms, we are completely unaffected by the life around us. So he tried to carry forward this dream in Shantiniketan. In fact, Shantiniketan could be looked at like a poet's dream. All that he tried there was very romantic. Tagore was a very romantic person, and his whole making of Shantiniketan was like an alternative educational system, which was a very romantic way of thinking of life, where you will be amidst nature, you will be amidst art, you will grow in harmony with the life around, where you will not be bogged down by closed doors, by classrooms, the things that he ran away from as a child in Calcutta, because he suffered a lot because of that. So in Shantiniketan, it is very interesting to see that it is none of Tagore's family who really came to support him, but it was Nandalal Bose, a student of Rabindranath Tagore, who actually responded to Rabindranath's call. And it is Rabindranath, with Nandalal's help, came to Shantiniketan and created an art institution which in the future, as we all know, became a big contributor to modernism in Indian art.
I have noticed that he didn't care to name his paintings.
Yes, in fact, if we generally look at an artist's life, there is always a masterpiece or there are a few important works. But when we look at Tagore's works, we see that maybe there is not, it's like a whole body of work that he was churning out, and some of them you might even question, is this art? And suddenly you will see the next one is very similar to this, but it is magnificent. So there was like a kind of a process, and he worked continuously. After he started painting around 1928 till 1940, 1 year before he passed away, he was like in one sitting every morning he started by doing a drawing or a painting. There were days he did 4 or 5 paintings, and slowly towards the end we see it is no more like erasures of manuscripts, but they were more landscapes which many feel resemble the Birbhum landscapes, which resemble the landscapes around Shantiniketan. And it's interesting to note, in his body of work, 2/3 are portraits. So he painted a lot of portraits. And one would think that for an artist who doesn't know technique, portrait would be something he will hesitate to do. But no, I think he was not inhibited by anything, and he was someone who was full of emotions, and I think that's why portraits interested him a lot, because he was very interested in the personality of a person. And I think all his writings, his dramas, even his compositions of songs, there was so much emotion in it. When we look at his paintings, they are silent, and I feel, that is my very personal feeling, I think that somewhere he was facing a solitude, the solitude of a genius, where finally actually he didn't meet anyone who really understood him in that depth from inside. I think even the experiment that he had started with Shantiniketan, towards the end he realized that it was getting difficult to support. He was not being able to maneuver it, and it was offered to the government. And of course, later on we know many things which he didn't want in education came back there. So if you ask me, I think the kind of silent melancholy or the kind of silent mood in his paintings is somewhere the inner solitude that he experienced. And I think this churning out through paintings was one of the best ways for him to give vent to it. In his literary work, the mood is very different from his paintings.
He experimented. There was a time, he had a huge span of writing career. He started off pretty early and he has written a lot. What happened actually, very frankly speaking, Rabindranath actually made poetry writing easy for Bengalis. Because anything he wrote turned out to be poetry. Initially, he had difficulty in being accepted because the style of writing prior to Rabindranath was rather heavy. They had their own beauty, but it was heavier. So Rabindranath made things very easy. The way he writes, the words he uses, his syntax, his sense of rhythm. Of course, he was a genius, so he touched anything, he wrote anything, sounded good. So what happened? At that time, the poets that were there initially started making fun of him, as it is, it always happens that way. But then he got established, and Rabindranath was Rabindranath after all. So the next move was everybody started copying him. And in...
But you cannot copy to be in touch with the divine, that's not possible.
Apart from that, a genius has a source of creation quite somewhere else.
Yes.
You see, it's the inspiration, the source of his inspiration was somewhere. And, there is a part which is skill. You may have the highest of inspiration, but if you haven't got the instrument or the equipment ready, you can't write. So he was both ways blessed that way. So people started copying him, and because of that or because of some other reason, I don't know, he actually changed his style of writing. The same poet earlier, the way he wrote, if you read his poems that are on the earlier part, you can see the impression or the shadow of Kalidasa. But everybody was inspired by Kalidasa. Then he came into his own, his own style. That Kalidas period was over, and that is a very huge part, his own. And then he realized that the influence that he had on Bengal society and Bengali mind was so big that it would become stereotyped. So he himself changed, or because he thought that change was necessary, as it is for whatever reason. So he changed his style of writing. Later poetry of Rabindranath is very different. He experimented with his novel writing also. There's a very famous novel called Shishir Kavita, The Last Poem. It's called The Last Poem. And there he experiments with human relation. And it's done so poetically. It's poetic prose actually. It's prose. There is absolutely exquisite. And he experiments with that. And he experiments the form of novel, for one thing. The element of the story, the characters and their love affair, that also he experiments with that. And he puts that love, which didn't really get fulfilled. I mean, the hero and the heroine don't really meet finally. They are separated. But the way he does it, he says that whatever you have received remains untouched. Whatever I have received remains untouched. To be able to say that on a human level itself is something I think which can be idealized. You see?
You mentioned earlier that he wrote a poem about Sri Aurobindo.
Yeah, on Sri Aurobindo.
Was it after they met here?
No. It wasn't. He met him there once after he came out of his prison. It's called Namaskar. You want me to read a little?
Yes, definitely.
It's one of my favorite poems. It opens, Aurobindo, Rabindra bows to you. That's how it opens. You are the voice of the country. You are the voice and the words taken form in you. Position, money, status, these are not for you. You have never stretched out your arms, your hand for asking or begging. You see, at that time, Congress, the party that it was asking for little allowances from the British government. Give us a little freedom here, a little autonomy there, that kind of thing. So that Rabindranath says, asking for alms, begging. You never asked for that. But you have wanted the entire, and nothing else but the entire complete freedom of the country. And that freedom of the country, the very soul of the country and the very soul of every Indian aspires for, knowingly or unknowingly. Because freedom is something that is a right. This is the experience of personal experience, basically. But it's, I think a lot of people, a few people at least would agree with me, that if you read Sri Aurobindo, you understand Rabindranath better. The nuances, the touches, you see, that you read between the lines of his poetry particularly. I was dealing only with his songs so far. The poetry and the significance of it. You read Sri Aurobindo and your vision broadens. Your way of looking at things, your judgment, everything broadens. And then you see, sometimes I feel this is perhaps almost blasphemous, what I'm going to say, by the lovers of Rabindranath, that he himself didn't understand what he was talking about.
He was just an intermediary.
Exactly. He was just the instrument through which the thing had to come. I'll read out a poem, and this is a very beautiful, and Sri Aurobindo, I think, has commented on it. You see, here it is actually a realization. It's called Nirjhore Shapno Bhango. It is a water body which is underneath a stone, you see, and that water, suddenly there is a crack in the stone and the sunlight falls on it and it wakens up. It's a beautiful poem. And he wakes up and sees this crack big enough to let the sunlight come. Not only that, it also brings in the bird song from the outside world. All this time it was covered under the stone, and there is some earthquake takes place and there is this crack and the water wants to gush out now. This morning the sunlight creeps into my dim cave. How is it that I hear the bird song coming from outside? And my waters rise up. And I can't stop my waters because my spirit, my life has woken up. And then he describes, he says, there is outside, there is an earthquake going on and the boulders are slipping down. And inside my waters foaming up. And it's thundering inside me. It wants to go out and it's going on, looking here, there. How is he going to come out of this prison of stone, of rock? And it can't find the way out. It's a prisoner. But it has heard the call. So you see the parallel, you understand the waking up of the inner being. All on a sudden, by some touch of the divine. And then it wants, and it wants. He said, break, break, and break. Whatever your heart desires, do it. Once I have been touched and I am awake, nothing can stop me. I am going to go out. And then it starts imagining that when it comes out of that prison of stone, it will flow. and where is it going to flow? It describes it. You see the change in the meter and the change the way he puts it. Once I come out, I will be on earth. It will be like nectar. It will be like compassion, because I'll make green the arid places through which I'll flow. And like mad I'll flow. And then it describes the river that will eventually come out as a girl, that I'll কেশ এলাইয়া ফুল কুড়াইয়া রামধনু আঁকা পাকা উড়াইয়া রবির কিরণে হাসি ছড়াইয়া দিবরে পরাণ ডালি। I'll open up my tresses and I'll dress up in rainbow colors and I'll carry the flowers that fall on me and I'll go and go and go. I've got so much to say. I've got so much life in me to give. I don't know what has happened. Why? Why? From this distance I can hear the call of the sea. So, symbolically, it's the soul that travels towards the Supreme. Here the sea stands for the Supreme. So I have heard the call of the Supreme and I have to go. I have to travel. I have to make my way no matter how hard the path is and what the obstacles are. So this poem is usually taken for a realization of or a very deep experience of the soul waking up and being touched by the divine.
Was he playing any instrument like piano?
No, not that I know of. He sang, but he didn't have a very good voice. I don't know whether I should criticize, but the recording methods were very bad at that time. He sang, and people used to call him for singing because he wrote, he tuned, so he was a complete artist from that point of view. But I don't think he played any piano. But his father gave him a very thorough training in music too when he was very young. A child's voice, his father used to love to hear him sing, and he was given a coaching by one of the very great pandits of music at that time, Judu Bhatto.
What about today's Bollywood? How interested they are in Rabindranath?
Oh my God, they don't want to touch him.
Is it
It'll go beyond.
too high for them?
Yeah, it will go bounce. It's not a question of not understanding, there was a gentleman here several years ago who was owner of a film company. He was a devotee of the mother. He used to come here regularly. I knew him very well. Tara Chand. He was known as Tara Chand. Mother had given him the name of Dvijay. Yeah, Dvijay. And I knew him very well. He used to produce Hindi films. He was very famous at that time, and every film used to be dedicated to the mother primarily. So he, knowing me, he used to ask for stories. He, at least then, what they did was to have a pakka story, some author's story to base the film. Today, it's a piecemeal, you watch, you take something that has been produced by Hollywood and little you add here and make a khichdi of it, that kind of. In those days, even till then, there was a storyline, and that story usually used to be written by some famous author. So he used to ask me for stories. And I've given him several stories. He could read Bengali. And I remember selecting some short stories and sending it. He used to put up in Golkond, Golkond. He used to stay there. From school I used to send him and he would read it. And a few of his films he had made, he's no more of course, made out of those stories. So I had asked him to make a film out of this Maloncho, I just now said garden. Because it's so poetic, it's so beautiful. And he said no. I don't know whether really ordinary people really understand Rabindranath. Today they do, I don't know. But the point is, you see what Tara Chand told me, he said no, because very simple, he said there is no box office for Rabindranath stories.
What about the books? Do they sell well or?
In Bengal, I believe they sell.
Yes.
But the translations are also, I think, pretty appreciated till now. I don't know the really percentage.
In Turkey, Rabindranath Tagore is known thanks to late Prime Minister Bülent Ecevit.
Acha. Yes.
He translated first from English, and then he wasn't happy. He learned Sanskrit
Acha.
at the age of 16, and he translated Rabindranath.
How did Sanskrit help him to understand?
First Sanskrit, then Bengali.
Acha. 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 Actually, Bengali and it's very close to Sanskrit. Actually, as a language, it's pretty.
It's the base. Is it the base?
Absolutely.
Like Sanskrit is the base of Hindi.
Oh, all the northern Indian language has Sanskrit as base. They're very close, you know, Bengali, Hindi, they are very close because they're very closely based on Sanskrit.
But I think Sanskrit's power of expression is much higher than other...
I believe so. Because the possibilities are much greater there. You know, you have the root and you just go on creating. So, no, I don't think, and today's mind, even Bengal doesn't understand Rabindranath very much.
But is it possible to imagine a Bengali family where they do not sing Rabindranath?
No, they do. Then I don't know. Absolutely, the modern families, the urban families, they are so hooked on to Bollywood. I would blame lack of judgment on our part. There are plenty of things that we can take from America, we can take from Europe. Plenty of things. Plenty. Take a little of their, determination to do something. That's how they have built it. No, we don't learn that. Because it is difficult to learn. It is easy to ape. So that's what we are doing. And as far as Bengali is concerned, Bengalis they have lost, I'm very unhappy to say it, but I believe I'm not far wrong. What was Bengal's speciality is spirituality, the series of spiritual leaders that Bengal has produced. That particular element of spirituality, that love for spirituality seems to be really dying out or died out. That even today when they use Rabindranath's songs in serials, Bengali serials, they're all misused. They don't understand the deeper meaning. I'll give you an example. The night when the doors were broken down by the storm, I did not know that you had come. Everything turned black. Shopje hoye gelo kalo, nibe gelo, my lamp also was extinguished. And then I stretched out my arms, not knowing towards whom. But I did not know it was you who had come. I remained in dark. I thought I was dreaming. I did not know that the storm was your flag. It's you standing on the emptiness of my life. I did not know that you had come. Do you see the significance of it? If something is not broken, if the heart is not broken, if there isn't a very deep pain, we do not realize him. And through that pain, I realized it was you who had come. You had broken my doors, broken my barriers. You have decided to come. Now, this song is being used for a separated lover. You see, if I had any way, I would have thrown rotten eggs at them. This is what Bengal has become today. The deeper meanings are all lost. All lost. when you have something like that and you go in for this cheap music, the cheap songs, and it's been going on. I mean, it's all right. I mean, I don't mean to say that nobody is going to write poetry after Rabindranath. No, I don't mean that. There should be something serious, some depth, some understanding, some perception. Nothing at all. Very cheap, very ordinary.
When Tagore was asked, what is art? Tagore said that art is something which comes from the realm of the unconscious, the intuitive, the superfluous. He believed that art and daily life had to be connected, but he also believed that man had a kind of superfluous energy in him, which was more than necessary for his daily life. And it was the expression of this superfluous energy which went towards the expression of art. So he believed that every artist, the religion of every artist was to channelize this superfluous energy. And towards the end of his life, he says that, writing is something which, when it changes into another language, it changes its impact. But he felt that music and art was something different. He felt, and even more than music, he felt art was something which was like timeless. He in fact says that it is deathless, he says. Art is deathless. And he says that because it is like nature, because it has to do with seeing with your eyes. And that is something which will always remain. While he felt that writing and poetry had to do with language as an intermediary. And so it was something that was restricted, which was not maybe reachable to all, or it would then change when it would be tried to reach to others in different languages. And I think that's why maybe he took this up in the end, where he felt it was something that alone could express what was within him, which the language could not express. I think many art critics are at times at a loss as to how to analyze his work, and he actually defies all criticism. Initially, for any layman who I think looks at his work might even question, is this art? But I think when you look at a body of his work, Tagore's paintings are such that when you look at just one, you might not be revealed of really the inner mystery that is lying hidden in those forms. But when you look at a series of works, in fact, they sometimes look like theatrical compositions, 2-3 figures standing against an orange setting sun backdrop, or sometimes it might seem like just something that has emerged out of the darkness, where you can't even clearly make out what the form is, and you almost have to guess what it is, and then you sometimes think it is a face, but you look properly, then you think, no, it's actually a figure, a tree, and then you see, no, it's actually a pot. So there is a lot of layers in his work, and this whole element of the hidden meaning, the mysterious feeling, the silent word, as we see, like, he doesn't have titles to his works, because it's not to do with words. It's just to do with a moment in time, or an emotion, or it is just maybe a frozen frame in a play. It might even just be that. It might just... and you will see that he's always playing a lot with the negative and the positive form. Sometimes you're looking at the positive form, but you actually don't find anything, and suddenly you see it's in the negative form that there is the form that is emerging, which is giving you the meaning. So Tagore is someone who like a bush in the darkness, might have multiple interpretations to his form, who might, like a cloud, when you look for very long, reveal many meanings out of it, or like a mossy wall, there might be suddenly a composition and then suddenly another composition. But whatever it is, he's someone who did not bother to get into. Earlier in his life, he was concerned with technique. He was interested by Raphael. We see some comments on Ravi Verma. But I think his kind of understanding of art progressed. And that's why slowly it was more the primitive art forms, more the archaic art forms, more kind of automatic drawing, more kind of spontaneous expression. These were the things which he felt were more important than technique. And that is why I think in the later stage of his life, he was able to take up the brush. Oh, one thing to say is, you know, he used a very ordinary fountain pen with pelican ink, and this was his tool for his writing, and it's the same tool that he used for his drawings. It's only later that he has used some brush or whatever.
I have noticed that he likes brown, earth colors, dark colors.
Yes.
You're totally in love with Van Gogh and sunflowers and bright colors. He's the opposite of you.
No, but in fact, I also like earth colors a lot, and if you see my early works, they are a little like that. But yes, I think the reason he liked these earth colors, the natural, it kind of gave more the, I think that atmosphere of peace and quietness, and it was more in harmony with, it's also like in the evening light, there are less colors, everything is more subdued. And I think that is the lighting which he liked. And he had spent some time in London in 1912, it seems. And a lot of the Celtic lighting, they say, might have also inspired him. So, also, you know, the Indian traditional paintings use a lot of earth colors. The rural villages around, the primitive artists had that kind of an earth color in their palette. So it was also like very, I think, national. It was very Indian.
You see, in the whole literary history of the world, we find two categories of writers: those who have been influenced by their past and the present, and those who can influence their present and the future. And the second category of writers are not many in number, they are very few. So one, Valmiki or Vyasa or Homer or Shakespeare or Sri Aurobindo, and Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore comes under the second category of, you can say, the minority category. Now, what is great about, for me, he is tremendously significant for one single reason. Apart from his genius as a writer, as a poet, his perception of the time. You know, Sri Aurobindo had two phases of his struggle for liberation. The first phase of his life was devoted to the struggle for liberating Mother India from the colonial clutch. The second phase of his life was devoted to liberating humanity from the clutches of primeval ignorance. Now, at both these stages, Rabindranath was one of those few people who understood him and who admired him. Imagine the humility of this great poet, who was 12 years senior to Sri Aurobindo, writing a poem in praise of Sri Aurobindo when he was arrested for so-called sedition, writing seditious articles in the newspaper Vande Mataram. He sang, "O Aurobindo, accept the salutations of Rabindranath. And this is one of his major poems because an anthology of select poems which he himself edited, he included this poem in that called Sanchayita. So Tagore is one who appreciated Sri Aurobindo during that phase of Sri Aurobindo's struggle for liberation. When Sri Aurobindo was in Pondicherry, struggling for the liberation of humanity from the dark abyss of ignorance to which mankind belongs, through his yoga, through bringing down a new power which he called the supramental. At that time also, Rabindranath made it a point to come and meet him at Pondicherry. Sri Aurobindo did not actually entertain many people in those days because he was engrossed in an exclusive yoga. But Tagore was welcome, and Tagore said again after meeting him, once again I say, Aurobindo, salutations of Rabindranath to you. So this is something which speaks great about Tagore, that his vision, as poetic genius is indisputable, but his vision of the human future. And you know, he was a writer, he was a man who did not simply cease to be anything more than a visionary. He tries to translate his vision into reality by establishing at least two great institutions, Santaniketan, Vishwabharati at Santaniketan, the university, which is still going on, and Sriniketan, another institution for the poor, the villager, the agrarian people. I mean, his vision embraced everybody. He did his best to uplift them and to bring them to some kind of a enlightenment. Now, and his dramatic and poetic genius was very, very widespread, very, very vast. It has many aspects. At the same time, primarily he was a great poet. But apart from poetry, his fiction is something breathtakingly fresh and relevant for all ages to come. Short stories and novels. He was, through his essays, giving us some of the most original ideas and thoughts which his contemporaries did not dream of. At once he was a dramatist, a poet, a fiction writer. As a dramatist, he was himself acting also on the stage. He was himself singing. He was reciting. He was directing his characters. At the same time, he was also becoming one of the characters. Now, so that is that. And again, I must come back to saying that, you see, to the Western world, he brought a new element of poetic sensation, sensibility, which was unknown to them. You see, I think I told you one day about Narayanakanta Gupta, who was a great freedom fighter and who was a lieutenant of Sri Aurobindo. He somewhere writes very beautifully that it was Socrates who made philosophy which belonged to the heavens come down to the people. Similarly, Rabindranath brought Vedantic vision down to the average lover of literature, a philosophy which was meant only for the sophisticated, for the seekers of inner truths, occult truths. And you know, that is his great contribution to the entire world of poetry. I mean, he was a vast, his range of poetic creativity was very vast. He could tackle any subject with ease. That is where, I think it was Plato who had said once, that an ordinary mind with a touch of some inspiration can produce marvelous poetry. A great mind without the touch of inspiration can produce only something dull, something lifeless. Now, so far Tagore is concerned, he had at once a great mind, at the same time lofty inspirations. So you can see that his range, any subject he touches, it becomes an inspiring poetry, metamorphosed into an inspiring poetry. From the heavenly nymph Urvashi, he describes her as one who is born like a flower without a stem. From that to the masses of people who work across the whole land, in the valleys, on the river coast, on the sea coast, over millions of ruins of empires, these people go on working for centuries and millennia. He sings of everybody, every subject upon the earth, which is, well, by his magic touch, translated, transformed into living poetry. That is greatness, and I salute him.